Close the camps! Open the cages!
Thank you.
Close the camps! Open the cages!
Civilian leadership is our main demand. Sudan gained independence in 1956, 64 years ago, and only 8 years have been under civilian leadership.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. After seeing horrific pictures from the border with Mexico of the refugee camps, particularly the treatment of children, and hearing from members of Congress who have gone there and seen the terrible conditions, there are protests springing up all around the country. Here's one in New Haven with over 100 people in front of the office of Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro.
Close the camps! Open the cages!
Thank you.
Close the camps! Open the cages! Close the camps! Open the cages!
Open up the pathway. Open it up.
Just like a pathway to citizenship. Let's have a manifestation of a pathway to citizenship. Let's have a manifestation of a pathway to citizenship.
I have a few folks who would like to read statements made by the children in detention camps in Clint, Texas. These are transcripts from interviews with children conducted by lawyers with the Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law.
The testimony of a 12-year-old male. I am hungry here at Clint all the time. I'm so hungry that I've woken up in the middle of the night with hunger. Sometimes I wake up from hunger at 4 a.m., sometimes at other hours. I'm too scared to ask the officials here for any more food, even though there is not enough food here for me. The testimony of a 16-year-old female. We are in a metal cage with 20 other teenagers with babies and young children. We have one mat we need to share with each other. It is very cold. We each got a Mylar blanket, but it is not enough to warm up. There are benches, but we cannot sleep there. Sometimes it is so crowded we cannot find any place to sleep. So they allow a few of us to sleep outside the fenced area. The lights are on all of the time. Close the camps.
Close the camps! Close the camps!
AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, member of Congress, called those dreadful camps concentration camps. And the Zionists thought they had a new weapon to use against her. They evidently believe only Jewish nationalists are allowed to use the word concentration camps. The Holocaust Museum in D.C. buckled under their pressure and issued a statement. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum unequivocally rejects efforts to create analogies between the Holocaust and other events, whether historical or contemporary. This absurdity from a museum that routinely and properly says, never again. Thankfully, young Jews increasingly are dismissing this nonsense. In Elizabeth, New Jersey, 36 of them were arrested as they blocked an ICE headquarters. They tweet at Never Again ACTN for action. The group has been in existence for just about a week and now has 20,000 followers. In Boston, 1,000 Jews blocked traffic as they marched across the city. Now that treatment of immigrant children is receiving attention, we suggest that some of that attention be given to the appalling jailings of Palestinian children. There's a bill in the U.S. House, HB 2407, that would prevent Israel from using any of the lavish money it gets from the U.S. to mistreat Palestinian children. We reported last week that Connecticut Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro became a co-sponsor of that bill, but she has, without any explanation, withdrawn her sponsorship. At the New Haven Immigrant Rally, I interviewed Shelly Altman of Jewish Voices for Peace.
Shelly, I understand that you brought up the issue of the Palestine Bill 2407 with the representative of Rosa DeLauro. What did you say?
I said that, first of all, I explained why I was here, and I'm here because it's unbearable, intolerable, and all the other descriptions of what you could have for what's going on in what AOC has called the concentration camps, and which are. But also because recently Rosa had signed on to a bill, HR 2407, protecting the human rights of Palestinian children living under Israeli military occupation. And this bill was introduced by Betty McCollum of Minnesota. But then 10 days after Rosa signed on to the bill, she abruptly withdrew her name as a co-sponsor, and it's her prerogative to decide which bills to support and which bills to not support. But we've had no explanation whatsoever of why she did it, whether it was a problem with the bill or whether there was some other factor that caused her to withdraw her sponsorship. We worked very closely with her office, and as far as we understand, the bill was vetted by her office, by the legislative aides in D.C., and Rosa was happy to sign on to the bill. And so we don't really understand and are still waiting for an explanation from our Congresswoman as to why she withdrew her name. That's what we want. That's the first step. Of course, we would love for her to put her name back on it and show some leadership on this issue here in Connecticut, but at first we at least want an explanation.
I assume you'd want the other Congress people in Connecticut to sponsor it?
Yes, of course we would, yes. And we are in active meetings and discussions with each of them, with Courtney Larson, Hayes, and Jim Himes, to get their support for it. And of course Rosa's support for it would be very helpful in gaining their support as well, since she's the senior member of the delegation here in Connecticut.
For more about that legislation, the final chunk of Brad Parker's talk, Brad Parker is with In Defense of Children, Palestine.
Through that work, we've worked over the years to build relationships with members of Congress, trying to sort of cultivate champions in Congress that can speak out on the issues. We've had Representative Betty McCollum from Minnesota, who's kind of from the beginning been committed and willing to be bold and lead on these issues. In, I guess, April 30th, she introduced a second bill into the House. She had previously introduced a bill in the last Congress. This is kind of a new version. It focuses on ensuring that U.S. military aid to Israel isn't used to further or support ill treatment, torture, due process violations of children. In the military court system, we have a few different documents that give a bit of background, sort of explain changes from the last bill to the new bill, and a bunch of other stuff that we're happy to talk about. We just were in Washington the past 3 days. Farah, I think, is still trying to feel her feet from all the walking. We met with, I think, about 18 different offices, trying to raise the bill, get everybody up to speed on the changes, and try to get our co-sponsors back, and then build with new members of Congress and some new voices that have sort of changed the discourse a bit. but I think the way the discussion is changing in Washington, some of the new voices that are speaking out and creating space where folks don't have to be so outspoken, they can sort of fall in behind some other folks. That's significant. The situation on the ground continues to deteriorate in Palestine. Also, the Israeli elections, right? All of these things are sort of playing together to create a different context in Washington where there is more openness and opportunity, particularly for the Connecticut delegation, but also some of these other members of Congress that have been, sympathetic with the issue but not willing to take action. So I think that's changing, and it's due to that really strong effort that you've all put in sort of throughout the state to really target all of the different members. So I think there'll be good news soon. I think the path is there, and we're working on a few different things behind the scenes to sort of facilitate that shift so it's possible for Rosa to come out and support her buddy Betty on this bill. But we'll see. I think the one thing that's, I think, sort of evidences the shift that we've been seeing is a recent article by Peter Beinart on Monday that endorses the bill, essentially endorses aid restrictions to Israeli military aid. I think it's a significant sort of moment for somebody like Peter Beinart to be endorsing this type of, what the bill says and the prohibition on funds going to these particular practices, and not having this sort of unconditional acceptance or funds going to the Israeli military. So if you're not familiar with Peter Beinart, if you're not familiar with this article, you can find it.
Where was it? Where did it come out?
It was in the forward. Yeah, on Monday. Yeah, if you type Peter military aid, you will find it.
You don't even need to say Beinart?
No, you just Peter and military aid to Israel. It should be the first. I would be surprised if it was any lower than the first, because there's This is sort of the moment we're in, right? There isn't that much out there about in mainstream sort of statements around cutting military aid to Israel, right? Or conditioning it. So if you just type Peter military aid Israel, I'm sure it will come up.
So Brad, you gave a talk about the treatment of Palestinian children. How did you get all involved in this? Where are you from?
So I'm from northern New York, have Syrian heritage, so grew up with a family that was oriented to the Middle East and following the news of the day. I was interested in the region, always wanted to go back, see family in Damascus and Syria. And so those interests eventually led me to seeing and wanting to learn more about the situation of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. Read a few books that highlighted the child detention issue and the situation of children in the military courts. DCI Palestine was the leading organization representing kids, so I went to the West Bank in 2008, met with DCI Palestine, volunteered for a summer, and then started working full-time in 2013, and been there ever since.
For 6 years then?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Please contact Rosa DeLauro, especially if you live in her district. This is her office number in D.C. The link below that will let you phone any member of Congress. Most of them have machines on 24/7. Ask them to support House Bill 2407. Now a few minutes from Democracy Now!
In Libya, an overnight airstrike killed at least 40 people and injured at least 80 others at a migrant detention center near the capital, Tripoli. The facility housed mostly African migrants. The UN-backed government of National Accord is blaming the opposition Libyan National Army led by the renegade General Khalifa Haftar. Violence around Tripoli has been mounting since Haftar's forces launched an offensive to capture Tripoli. Human rights groups say both sides may have committed war crimes by attacking heavily populated civilian areas. In Israel, members of the Ethiopian community took to the streets Tuesday to protest racism and the police killing of teenager Solomon Teka in Haifa on Sunday. Major roads were blocked. 60 people were arrested as police clashed with protesters.
The Israeli police aren't learning. There are criminals inside the police force, and the police leadership is unable to condemn them. And it creates not only damage, but also deaths.
In Arizona, federal prosecutors announced Tuesday they will retry humanitarian activist and No More Deaths volunteer Dr. Scott Warren after a jury refused to convict him last month for providing water, food, clean clothes, and beds to 2 undocumented migrants crossing the Sonoran Desert. Prosecutors have, however, dropped the conspiracy charge against Warren. Prosecutors will repeat their case against him in front of a jury in November. If convicted, Dr. Warren faces up to 10 years behind bars. This is Scott Warren responding to the news Tuesday in front of the federal courthouse in Tucson.
I do not know what the government has hoped to accomplish here. I do know what the effect of all this has been and will continue to be. A raising of public consciousness, a greater awareness of the humanitarian crisis in the borderland, more volunteers who want to stand in solidarity with migrants, local residents stiffened in their resistance to border walls and the militarization of our communities, and a flood of water into the desert at a time when it is most needed.
Note, these are Ethiopian Jews. These are not any of the refugees who have run to Israel. Their treatment is even worse. And of course, Palestinians are a whole new level. Some of the protests were violent. A car was torched and one protester threw an electric scooter toward the blaze. Pope Francis met with Russian ruler Vladimir Putin on Thursday. Some in Idlib had hopes that the pontiff would raise the matter of the bombing of schools and hospital and other civilian targets in Syria with the Russian ruler. But no news source has claimed that they had, in fact, discussed the matter. Idlib is undergoing brutal bombing by Russian and Assad planes. One report said 82 targets were hit on July 3rd. This fire reportedly was caused by white phosphorus. Syrians are desperately trying to get the word out to the world, asking for support. Some activists have launched hunger strikes. It's pathetic that this is necessary, but some Syrians in Idlib put out a video to remind the world that the millions of them living there are not terrorists.
I'm Leah Aziz from the western countryside of Aleppo. I'm a student at the university, hope to live in a free country without Assad, who bombs us every single day and kills our hopes. I'm not a terrorist, but he is.
أنا محمد ياسين أعيش في المناطق المحررة. أنا لست إرهابيا.
أنا إبراهيم يسوف إعلامي سوري أعيش في المناطق المحررة. أنا لست إرهابيا.
اسمي محمد أعيش في المناطق المحررة. أنا في الصف الخامس. أنا طالب مالي إرهابي.
أنا إيمان هاشم. أنا ضد بشار الأسد. أنا ضد الفساد. أنا ضد النظام الأسدي البعثي القاتل ومالي إرهابية.
أنا من مدينة الأتارب اسمي حسين عبد الرزاق عبيد. لأننا إرهابيين مواطنين بهذا البلد.
My name is Juma Ali. I live in north of Syria. I'm a revolutionary against Al-Assad's regime and against killing and against bombing hospitals and schools. I'm not terrorist.
أنا إيهاب خالد طالب جامعي أعيش في المناطق المحررة. أنا لست إرهابيا.
سامي القربي ناشط مدني، ناشط ثوري، ناشط مدني، أقيم في المناطق المحررة. أنا ضد نظام الأسد. أنا مالي إرهابي.
السلام عليكم. أنا نور عبيد عايشة بالشمال السوري، بدرس بجامعة حلب المحررة بالمناطق المحررة، وأنا طالبة ماني إرهابية.
My name is Muhammad Al-Qasim. I am living from the city in Idlib. I want to say that I am against injustice. I am against the killer of children and civilians. I am against Assad regime and Iranian and Russian forces. I am not a terrorist.
أنا عزيز الأسمر بعيش في الشمال السوري المحرر. أنا رسام وماني إرهابي.
ماني إرهابي.
In Sudan, there was a massive protest despite an internet blackout and the massacre of over 100 people about a month ago. In Hartford, a number of Sudanese gathered in a supportive protest. The video is by iPhone. The sound is clear.
To all the ones that risked their lives and died helping our country, truly deserve the world's attention. Thank you.
My name is Bakri Ali, and I know the average age of speakers now jumped to double, maybe. But I'm really proud, so proud, to see our youth organize this event in such a way. Please give it up to yourself, please. Thank you, everyone. So by now we all know what is happening in Sudan, and I hope I finish before it rains. By now we know what's happening in Sudan. We know what the people of Sudan are asking for. 3 simple words: حرية, سلام, وعدالة. حرية, سلام, وعدالة. مدنية, قرار الشعب. And I'll translate that. حرية, freedom. Salam, peace. Adala, justice. So, freedom, peace, and justice. Freedom, peace, and justice. Freedom, peace, and justice. A civilian leadership. A civilian leadership. Freedom, peace, and justice. Freedom, peace, and justice. A civilian leadership. A civilian leadership. Not too much to ask for in the 21st century, right? Freedom, peace, justice, and a civilian leadership. Not too much to ask for when people are talking about self-driving cars and kids in elementary schools are learning how to code. Not too much to ask for. Our youths in Sudan are spending hours and hours asking for fair and basic demands. They're sleeping on the streets in front of the army headquarters, and we all know what happened there, the massacre that took precious lives. And we're stuck, or seem to be stuck, with the Transitional Military Council. But to everyone, no matter what they do, we are winning. They shut down the internet 27 days ago, almost a month without internet, thinking that if they choke the internet, people will not show up. And guess what? Today, June 30th, the largest ever crowds in the history of Sudan. Millions on the streets. So, the Sudanese people have tasted freedom. They took out Omar al-Bashir, a 30-year dictator. And that's significant, 30 years in power. The guy had all the time to fortify his ruling, all the time to terrorize the people, and to build all the alliances that will ensure that he lasts forever in power. Yet, we took him out. Not just that, but we took the guy who pretended to push him out. And we are in the process of taking out the last wave of the remnants of the dictatorship. And we will do it with your support, with your help. And why do we say civilian leadership? Shouldn't we just say peace, freedom, and justice, and just stop there? No, we shouldn't. And why? Because civilian leadership ensures all the above. That's why civilian leadership is our main demand. Sudan gained independence in 1956, 64 years ago, and only 8 years have been under civilian leadership. We have had civilian leadership for only 7 or 8 years, and we see the result. We see the result of what military leadership has caused us.
Look, you just gotta keep going.
We keep going. So while the world is moving forward, our people are stuck looking for the basics, looking for bread, looking for gas, for electric power. That's what we get from a military leadership. That's why our ask is a civilian leadership. And as I said, we're getting so very close. We have come so far that failure is not an option anymore. Failure is not an option because we've come so far. We're so close to achieving our goal. And this happened because of the generous support of all humanity. I would like to thank everyone who showed up today, who took precious time during the weekend to come and participate and stand with our people in Sudan. Thank you very much. All your support is helping our people in Sudan stay strong. Not just the financial support, and I'll talk about that in a minute. All the support, all these phones that are taking pictures now, our people in Sudan will see these beautiful faces.
So we're here on Sunday. We just had a rally for Sudan in Hartford. Why don't you tell me what brought you all out here today?
We're here in solidarity with our brothers and sisters back in Sudan, who today is a very important day for. It's June 30th, which is the 30th anniversary of this regime, the dictatorship. So today, millions of people in Sudan are out protesting, and we're here in solidarity.
As we record, Sudanese activists are reporting an agreement with the Sudanese military, a power-sharing agreement. Sounds incredibly dangerous. We will continue to report. Finally, new graphics for the upcoming International Student Strike for the Climate, scheduled for September 20th. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.